All right. Good morning. Good morning. So I do love Robert Louis Dabney's writing. It's fun. It's really fun. So it's a little. It can be a little on the nerdy side, but that's just how I get down. I think the dude's really, really intelligent, and so I'm going to read some of this here in the sunshine. All right. Here at PJ's in Amite City, Louisiana. So actually, I'm going to go to page 130, start at 130. It says, but what is appetency? What is appetency? It says, if we conformed it with passion, with mere impression on natural sensibilities, we again fall into the fatal errors of the centralists. Sir William Hamilton has done yeoman's service to truth by illustrating the difference, in parentheses, while he has claimed more than due credit for originating the distinction, close parentheses. He separates the passive powers of sensibility from the active powers of conation. Conation. It says, I highlight this. It says, this is but the old, in parentheses, and correct, close parentheses, Calvinistic classification of the powers of the soul under, quote, understanding, quote, affections, and, quote, will. Here, be it noted, the word will is taken as in some places of our confession in a much wider sense than the specific faculty of choice. Will here includes all the active powers of the soul and is synonymous with Sir William Hamilton's conative powers. Conative powers. When we say then that man's soul is self determining, we mean that in the specific formation of choice, the soul choosing is determined by a complex of previous functions of the same soul, seeing and desiring. In this sense, the soul is free. But as has been stated, no cause in the universe acts lawlessly. Quote, order is heaven's first law, end quote, and the regulative law of souls, when causing volitions, is found in their dispositions. This all important fact in free agency is what the scholastic divines called habitus, habitus, not uh, consuetudo, consuetudo. It is the same notion popularly expressed by the word character. We know that man has such habitus or disposition, which is more abiding than any access or one series of acts or any one desire. For we deem that in a knave, for instance, evil disposition is present while he is eating or laughing or asleep or while thinking of anything else than his knavish plans. If we will reflect, we shall see that we intuitively ascribe disposition of some sort to every rational free agent. Indeed, we cannot think such an object without it. God, angel, demon, man, each is invariably conceived as having some abiding disposition, good or bad. It is in this that we find the regulative principle of the free agency of all volition rises according to subjective motive. Subjective motive arises, in parentheses, freely, according to ruling subjective disposition. Disposition also is spontaneous. Its very nature is to act freely. Here, then, we have the two ultimate factors of free agency: spontaneity, disposition. Here we are at the end of all possible analysis. It is as vain to ask, quote, why am I disposed thus, end quote, as to seek a prior root of my spontaneity. The fact of my responsibility as a free agent does not turn on the answer to the question. It turns on this, that the disposition, which is actually my own will, regulates the rise freely of just the subjective motives I entertain. Let the student ponder my main argument, in parentheses on pages 122 to 124, close parentheses, and he will see that in no other way is the free agency of either God, angel, or sinner to be construed by us. Nice. Dr. Mokosh, MC, capital COCH, Mikosh, Dr. Mikosh, see, Master Divinity and Moral Government as is cited in the syllabus. Okay. Rests the true doctrine in some degree. He calls the will the, quote, optative faculty, close parentheses, correctly distinguishing desire from sensibility, in parentheses, which he terms emotion, close parentheses. But he erroneously confounds appetency, and volition together as the same functions of one power. That this is not correct is evinced by one short question. May not the soul have two competing appetencies and choose between them? Got him. Got him. We must hold fast with the great body of philosophers to the fact that the power of decision or choice is unique and not to be confounded even with subjective desires. It is the executive faculty. Dr. Mikash concedes that motive, as defined by Edwards, efficaciously decides the will. But he then asserts with Coleridge, Coleridge, with Coleridge, that the will determines motives. Conceding this, he has virtually surrendered his doctrine to the Arminian and gotten around to a literal self determination of the will. He seems to have been misled by an inaccurate glimpse of the truth I stated on page 102, that the disposition determines a priori which sorts of objects shall be inducements to it. There is a twofold confusion of the profound and important truth. Disposition is not the will, but a regulative principle of the appetencies or optative functions, through them controlling the will. And second, it is wholly another thing to say that this disposition decides which objects shall be inducements, uh, the occasions only of volitions, and to say with Dr. Mikosh that uh, to say that the Dr. Mikosh, the will chooses among the soul's own subjective motives, the vere causae of the very acts of choice! Exclamation point. We've got what, 3 paragraphs left of this lecture. It says Dr. Isaac Watts, as is often stated, attempted to modify the doctrine of the will by supposing that we had inverted the order of cause and effect. He deemed that we do not choose an object because we have desired it, but that we desire it because we have chosen it. In other words, he thought desire the result and not the forerunner of choice. This scheme obviously leaves the question unanswered: how do volitions arise? And by seeming to leave them without cause, he favors the erroneous scheme of the Arminian. Got him. It is enough to say that no man's consciousness, properly examined, will bear out this position. Do we not often have desires where, in consequence of other causes in the mind, we form no volition at all? The question will be seen decisive. Dr. Albert Taylor Bledsoe, in his reply to Edwards, Theodicy and other essays attempt to modify the Arminian theory without surrendering it. He is too perspicacious, perspicacious to say, with the crowd of semi-Pelagians, that volitions are uncaused results in the mental world. He knows too well the universality of the great necessary intuition, ex nihilo nihil, ex nihilo nihil. But denying that motives, even subjective, are cause of acts of choice. He says, the mind is the immediate cause of them. He seems here to approach very near the orthodox view. Even Dr. Alexander could say, while denying the self-determination of the will, that he was ready to admit the self-determination of the mind. But this concession of Dr. Bledsoe does not bring him to the correct ground. It leaves the question unexplained, and what way the mind is determined from within to choice. It refuses to accept the efficient influence of subjective motive. Um, it still asserts that any volition may be contingent as to its use, thus embodying the essential features of Arminianism. And above all, it fails to see or admit the most fundamental fact of all, that original disposition which regulates each being's desires and volitions. The applications which this author makes of his modified doctrine betray still its essential Arminianism. Amen. In conclusion, it is only necessary at this place to say in one word that the disposition which is found in every natural man as to God and godliness is depravity. Hence, his will, according to the theory expounded above, is in the scriptural sense in bondage to sin, while he remains properly a free and responsible agent. Amen. That was awesome. Write that down. It's the end of page 132 of Robert Louis Dabney's lecture. Well, it's a systematic theology book. Let's see. So finished. And today's the 23rd, 10 23 22. Okay. And it is, looks like 8:47 a.m. Central Time. Amite City, Louisiana. There we go. PJ's Coffee. Love it. All right, so that lecture was called, we're 12 minutes in right now, maybe 13 minutes in. It's of lectures in theology, but it was the free agency and the will, right? Lecture number 11, free agency and the will, which I got a kick out of. The next lecture, lecture number 12, the responsibility and province of reason and religion. All right. The responsibility and province of reason and religion. I got a big SUV right here blocking my sunshine. How dare it? How dare you block my sunlight? All right, shall we? There we go. The responsibility and province of reason and religion. Syllabus have dispositions and desires which are a priori to volition, a moral character? Question mark. Let's see. Number 2, is man responsible for his beliefs? And number 3, what is the proper province of reason and I'm sorry, what is the proper province of reason in revealed theology? That's great. It says wide difference of opinion has long prevailed as to man's responsibility for the dispositions, habits, and desires tending to moral volitions. Pelagians and semi-Pelagians say that since responsibility cannot be more extended. Got a phone call over here. No, we are not answering that call. There we go. Thank you. Pelagians and semi-Pelagians say that since responsibility cannot be more extended than freedom of the will, no praise or blame can be attached to dispositions which they hold to be involuntary. And they say that Calvinists cannot dispute the latter statement because they make dispositions causes of volition and thus going before. Hence, also is the Pelagian definition of sin and holiness as consisting only of right or wrong acts of soul. The evangelical Arminian is usually found holding the middle ground, that only those dispositions, habits, and desires have a moral responsibility attached to them, which have resulted from a series of acts of free will. But we hold that man is praise or blameworthy for his dispositions, principles, and habits, as well as for his volitions, and that his responsibility depends on the nature and not on the origin of the disposition which he spontaneously and intelligently entertains. We make our appeal here to consciousness, which causes us shame and self reproach for evil propensities not ripened into volitions, and tells us that we would feel equal resentment for evil dispositions toward us and our rights, though never formed into the overt intention of injury. And 2D says, our minds intuitively judge that the moral character of an act resides in its motives. Witness the process of investigation and the charge for crime before a jury. Indeed, the act of volition, nakedly considered, is a merely natural effect. It has no more moral character than the muscular motions which follow it. For the volition which extends for the volition which extends the hand with alms to an enemy or with a bribe to one to commit a sin is the same physical volition. We must go back. We must go back. We must go back of it to the motive by which it was caused to settle its moral character. That element is not in the naked volition, says the Pelagian. It is not in the motives prior to volition. Then it is nowhere! Exclamation point. 3D says the notion is inconsistent with our established idea about character. Here is a man who is said to have a dishonest character. It only becomes cognizable to us by his acts. He must then have performed a series of acts having the common quality of dishonesty. Now, nothing comes from nothing comes from nothing. There must be some cause for that sameness of character. And that cause is the prevalent disposition to steal, separate from and prior to each thievish act. For the bad cause cannot be in the will itself. This would be peculiarly objectionable to the Pelagian. This then is what is meant when this man is said to have a bad character. Has the word bad here no proper meaning? Does the family of daughters, does the family of daughters, the separate acts, does the family of daughters, I'm about to sneeze. Oh, sorry about that. Whew, thank you, Jesus. All right. Does the family of daughters, the separate acts, bear no relationship to their mother? Fourth, on the Pelagian scheme, the wickedness of sins of omission would be inexplicable. For in them there is often no volition at all, and therein consists their wickedness. A man passing by the water sees an innocent child drowning. The idea of rescue is suggested to his mind, but he comes to no choice, does nothing. And while he hesitates, the child sinks to rise no more. Is he innocent? Our conscience declares that he is not. Now, we can consistently explain wherein he is not, visibly, in the state of his selfish and indolent feelings, but the opposite party have no explanation. There has literally been no volition. On their theory, they should say what every sound conscience rejects, that the neglect has been attended with no guilt. And fifth, a similar argument is presented by instances of impulsive and unpremeditated acts done before we have a moment for reflection. We properly approve or blame them, according as they are generous or malignant. But there has been no intelligent, deliberate choice. If we continue our view exclusively to the act of soul itself, it appears as purely irrational as the impulses of mere animal instinct. The moral quality of these acts must be found then in the dispositions and principles which prompted them. Such are the reasonings drawn from the conscience and consciousness of all men. The conclusion cannot be restricted in the way proposed by the Arminian. For if original or congenital dispositions have no moral quality because not created by a series of acts of intelligent free will, then first, God could never have any moral credit, his holy disposition having been not only original and eternal, but necessary. And 2D says, nor could the holy man, Adam, or the holy angels have been approvable, though perfectly innocent, because their holy dispositions were infused into them by their Creator. This contradicts both conscience and Scripture. 3D, when mankind see an inherited trait influencing the conduct, like the traditionary bravery of the Briton or the congenital vengefulness of the American Indian. Um, Vengefulness of the American Indian, if they apprehend that the agents are not lunatic and are exercising a sane spontaneity as qualified by these natural traits, they approve or blame them. This shows that in the judgment of common sense. This shows that in the judgment of common sense, the responsibility turns only on the question what the disposition is and not whence it is. Last, on this view, it would be impossible that the free agent could ever construct a righteous disposition or habitus by his own free acts, for all are agreed in the rule of practical law, which judges the moral complexion of the act according to the agent's intention. But a soul as yet devoid of positively righteous principles would harbor no positively moral intentions. Hence, the first act of choice, which the philosophers look to for beginning the right moral habitude, would have no moral quality. Not being dictated by a moral motive, then it could contribute nothing to the habit as a moral one. This very plain demonstration decides the whole matter by showing that on either the Pelagian or Arminian scheme, a dependent being could never have a positively righteous character or action at all. I'm having a good time 23 minutes into this. Our opponents argue that the involuntary cannot be sin. Oh, geez. A little side thing. It says, but objected, quote, that the involuntary cannot be sin, end quote. That's bad. All right. So it says, and they suppose that they have entrenched themselves in the plainness of moral intuitions. The objection is nonetheless a sophism founded in the ambiguous use of the word involuntary. A man's moral dispositions are involuntary in the sense that they do not immediately result from volitions as their next cause. By this is not the sense in which our intuitions assert the necessity of the voluntary to our responsibility. There is an entirely different sense in which we say an act is involuntary when it occurs against the choice of the will. Thus, the fall of the man over the precipice was involuntary when he was striving to cleave to the edge of the stone. This is the sense in which we say that self evidently the man was not blamable for his fall. The other meaning, sophistically confounded with this, raises the question whether the state or disposition is spontaneous. if it's if it acts spontaneously, not because a stronger agent forces the man to harbor or to indulge it against his choice. Then, in the sense necessary to free agency, disposition is voluntary. Voluntary. That is to say, it is spontaneous. It is as truly a function of self love as volition itself. The evidence is very near and plain. Does any external compulsion cause us to feel our dispositions? No. From their very nature, it cannot be. A compelled tendency would not be our disposition, but a violence put upon it. The main question may be submitted to a very practical test. Would a disposition to a wicked act subsist, even as not consented to or formed into a purpose in a perfectly holy soul like that of Gabriel for one instant? It would die in its very incipiency. It would die in its very incipiency. The attempt to inject the attempt to inject concupiscence uh, would be like an attempt to strike sparks from the flint and steel in a perfect vacuum. The fire would expire in being born. But if the holiness of the nature thus excluded the birth, this clearly shows that the very birth of wrong desire or tendency is wrong. Another objection is that our theory of the immorality of evil dispositions would imply that the soul's essence is altered, or that depravity is a change in the substance of the soul, which would make God the author of sin and man an unfortunate uh, sentient puppet. Oh, that's good. For say they, there is nothing but the soul and its acts. And if you deny that all morality resides in acts, some of it must reside in the essence of the soul itself. The sophism of this argument would be sufficiently exposed by asking what is a moral act. If you make it anything more than a mere notional object of thought, an imagination about which we think. Is it anything besides the soul acting? Well, in the same sense, our moral dispositions are but our soul's feelings. I reply again, and yet more decisively, that moral quality is only negative, i.e., we got a little Greek here. Uh, um, amartia, anamia. So it's like sin, amartia, sta, anamia. It is the lack of conformity to God's will which constitutes sin. Okay, nice. The negative absence of this principle of active conformity is all that is necessary to predicate. Thus, the idea of depravity. Hello, hello. Thus, the idea of depravities being a substantial change is seen to be out of the question. We might farther reply to the challenge whether there is anything before us save the soul and its acts. Yes, there is the soul's essence distinguishable from its substance. There is its disposition. There are its liabilities, its affections, its desires. The terms of the cavil are no more than a verbal quibble. What true philosopher ever questioned the existence of qualities qualifying a spiritual agent, yet not implying either decomposition or change of its simple substance? Then it is possible that it may be qualified morally. The next paragraph. We are at 29 minutes in, and it's just what 9:05 says. The question whether man is responsible for his belief is nearly connected with the one just discussed. Many modern writers have urged that he is not, because belief is the necessary and involuntary result of evidence seen by the mind. Further, it is urged if the doctrine If the doctrine that man is responsible for his belief be held, then the horrible doctrine of persecution will follow. For erroneous beliefs, being often very mischievous, if also criminal, it would follow that they ought to be punished by society. To the first, I reply that while the admission of demonstrative proofs, when weighed by the mind, is necessary and involuntary, the voluntary powers have a great deal to do with the question whether they shall be weighed fairly or not. Inattention, prejudice against the truth or the advocate, heedlessness, guilty and wicked habits of perverting the soul's faculties, all these are voluntary, and I fearlessly assert that no erroneous belief on any important moral question can arise in a same mind except through the operation of one or more of these causes. In this, then, is the guilt of false beliefs on moral subjects. To the second objection, I reply that it does not follow because a man is responsible for his beliefs. He is responsible to his fellow man. There are abundant reasons for denying the latter, which it would be easy to show if I were going into the subject of freedom of thought. Next paragraph. On the affirmative side, I remark first that all the analogies of nature show us a providence, capital P, holding man responsible for his beliefs. If prejudice, passion, have a great day today. All right. If prejudice, passion, haste, inattention prevents a man from attaching due weight to testimony or other evidence as to the poison of a given substance, he experiences its effects just as though he had taken it of set purpose. So, of all other things. Second, conscience clearly condemns many acts based immediately on certain beliefs, which were sincerely held at the time of acting. Now, if the belief had not, if the belief had been innocent, the act necessarily dictated thereby could not have been blameworthy. Witness Paul, confessing the sin of his persecutions. Indeed, since belief on moral subjects ought to and must dictate the conduct. If a man is allowed to be a rational free agent, each man's own belief must be his own guide, and hence an act might be right to one man and wrong to another at the same time. A would have a right because he believed so to a thing which B had a right to. And so B would have a moral right to do A, what would be to him a moral wrong. And farther, since whatever a man sincerely believed would be right to him, truth would cease to be of any essential importance. The consequence is monstrous. Hence, we must hold men responsible for their moral beliefs. God could not otherwise govern a world of rational free agents, for since the free dictates of each agent's soul must be to him the guide of his conduct, God could not justly condemn him for committing the crime which he supposed at the time to be a right act after he had been acquitted of all responsibility for the opinion which unavoidably dictated the act. But is every one rash enough to justify all the crimes committed in this world under the influence of moral error heartily held at the time? Then the vilest crimes which have scourged the world, from the retaliatory murders of savages, in parentheses, dictated by stress or tribal honor, close parentheses, to the persecution of God's saints, in parentheses, by inquisitors who verily thought they were doing God's service, close parentheses, are made perfectly innocent. It may be well to say a few more words to relieve the seeming paradox in this truth. To this separate element of the act, that it was conformed to the man's opinion of the right at the time, as that element is. As that element is, abstracted in thought from all other features of the concrete sin. We do not suppose any criminality to attach, but we are bound to go back to the prior question. How came a being endowed with reason and conscience actually to believe the wrong to be right? Could this result have been innocently brought about? To say this would be to accuse God, his maker. Yikes. I can apprehend how God's finite handiwork, a rational soul, may remain ignorant of many truths known to larger intelligences, but I cannot admit that it can be betrayed into positive error by the normal, legitimate exercise of its powers. There is then always a prior account of the mental perversion. The conditions of the erroneous result have been sinful indolence in looking at evidence, or unrighteous self interest, or criminal prejudice against the truth of or its advocate, or some other combination of evil affections. To these specifically attaches the guilt of the erroneous mental result. We see thus that belief is not the involuntary result of evidence apprehended in any practical moral case. The will, in parentheses, taking that word in its wider sense of the active optative powers, close parentheses, has a great deal to do with the result by inclining or disposing the mind to give proper heed to the attainable evidences. So much weight has this fact that the profound Descartes, Descartes, how you say? I should know how to say it. Descartes, Descartes, who almost deserves to be called the founder of modern philosophy, actually ranked belief as a function of will rather than of understanding! Exclamation point. Here, then, I place myself. When an action of soul is spontaneous, it may be to that extent justly held responsible. Next paragraph says, let's see, number three, province of reason is revealed in religion. The question with which we close this brief review of the nature of man's primary judgments has ever been of fundamental importance in the church. Quote, what is the legitimate province of reason in revealed theology? End quote. The pretended warfare between reason and faith has been waged by all those who wish to make a pretext for believing unreasonably and wickedly. On the one hand, it is possible so to exalt the authority of the church or of theology, in parentheses, as is done by Rome, close parentheses, as to violate the very capacity of reason to which religion appeals. On the other, it is exceedingly easy to give too much play to it and admit thus the virus of rationalism in some of its forms. All the different forms of rationalism which admit a revelation as true or desirable at all may be grouped under two classes. First, those who hold the proton pseudos of the Socinians, that man is to hold nothing credible in religion which he cannot comprehend, and to D, those who, like the modern German rationalists, make the interpretations of Scripture square with the teachings of human philosophy instead of making their philosophy square with the plain meaning of Revelation. Got 'em. Under the latter class must be ranked all those who, like Hugh Miller, in his testimony of the rocks, hold that the interpretation of the Pentateuch concerning cosmogony or cosmogony must be molded supremely by the demands of its geological theories instead of being settled independently by its own laws of fair exegesis. Here also belong those who, like A. Barnes, say that the Bible must not be allowed to mean what would legitimate American slavery. Okay, A. Barnes say that the Bible must not be allowed to mean what would legitimate American slavery because he holds that his ethical arguments prove it cannot be right. Et id omni genus, a little bit of Latin for you. The absurdity of the first class will be shown more fully when we come to deal with the Socinian theology. It is enough to say now that reason herself repudiates such a boast as preposterous. She does not truly comprehend all of anything, not the whole nature and philosophy of the blade of grass which man presses with his foot, nor the modus of that union of body and soul which consciousness compels us to admit. Every line of knowledge which we follow leads us to the circumference of darkness, where it is lost to our comprehension, and the more man knows, the more frequently he is compelled to stop humbly at that limit and acknowledge his lack of comprehension. So that the most truly wise man is he who knows and believes most things which he does not comprehend. That's good. There's an asterisk there. It says, it is related that the famous Dr. Parr, Parr, upon hearing a young Socinian flippantly say he would believe nothing he could not comprehend, answered, quote, then, sir, you will have the shortest creed of any young gentleman in the kingdom. Oh, got him. Got him. Oh, crap. He says, it is related that the famous Dr. Parr, Parr, upon hearing a young Socinian flippantly say he would believe nothing he could not comprehend, answered, quote, then, sir, you will have the shortest creed of any young gentleman in the kingdom. Oh, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I got to pull it together. That our comprehension is not the measure of truth appears again. Thus, truth is one and immutable, but the amount of comprehension any given man has is dependent on his cultivation and knowledge. 30 years ago, it would have been wholly incomprehensible to a field hand how a message could be sent along a wire by galvanism. It was not incomprehensible to Dr. Joseph Henry, who actually instructed Morse, the nominal inventor, how it might be done. On this Socinian scheme, then truth would be contradictory for different minds. One man's valid code of truth would properly be, to a less cultivated man, in large part falsehood and absurdity. But this is preposterous. But does not the Protestant assert against the Papists that faith, in order to be of any worth, must be intelligent? Do not we scout the implicit faith of the Papist? Does this kind of count, countenance implicit faith? Does this countenance implicit faith? All right, so let me read it again. It says, but does not the Protestant assert against the Papists that faith, in order to be of any worth, must be intelligent? Do not we scout the implicit faith of the Papist? There is a distinction which fully solves this question, and which is simple and important. Every judgment in the form of a belief is expressed in a proposition. This grammatically consists of subject, predicate, and copula. Now, the condition of rational belief is that the mind shall intelligently see some valid supporting evidence for the copula. If without this, it announces belief, it is acting unreasonably, but it is wholly another thing to comprehend the whole nature of the prediction. And this latter is And this latter is not at all necessary to a rational faith. The farmer presents me on the palm of his hand a sound grain of corn and a pebble. He says, "This is dead, but that is alive." May I not, with him, rationally believe in the vitality of the grain? Yes, because we have some intelligent view of the experimental evidence which supports the affirmation. But suppose now I pass to the pre- predication alive and demand of the farmer that he shall give me a full definition of the nature of vegetable vitality. The greatest physicist cannot do this. Neither he nor I comprehend the nature of vegetable vitality. We know by its effects that there is such a force, but it is a mysterious force. Let the student then hold fast to this simple law. In order to rational belief, there must be some intelligent view of evidence sustaining the copula, but there may be no comprehension of the nature of the predicate. One more short paragraph says, now, if these things are just and true in all natural knowledge, how much more true in the things of the infinite God? The attempt of the Socinian to make a lowercase g God altogether comprehensible has uh, resulted in a plan attended inevitably with more any worse incomprehensibilities, yes, impossibilities than they reject. That's funny. And then the second, what time is it? It's about that time. All right. I'm gonna stop it right there, page 140. Page 140. All right, page 140, halfway down the page. Yo, it was fun. Thank you, First Baptist Roseland YouTube page. All right, it's been fun. So that was what page 131 to 140 of Robert Louis Dabney's Systematic Theology, in my opinion, which is excellent, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Later.